All right, joining us now is John Sandwig, former acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, under President Obama, and former federal prosecutor Barrett Berger. John, sorry about that. It's been a long day here. I do want to ask you, deportations are, of course, nothing new. The U.S. government does them all the time. The Obama administration did them. The Biden administration did them. But when it comes to children who are U.S. citizens of people being deported, how is that usually handled? Is there a process for this? And if so, was that followed in these cases?
Well, typically you want to avoid these cases to the greatest extent possible. And I think the larger question is why were we prioritizing this woman in the first place? This woman, based on what I'm seeing, it looks like she had what's called a stay of removal, meaning that she had gone through the immigration courts and ICE had chosen to allow her to stay in the United States because of those U.S. citizen children. The problem is once she's taken into custody and they say you have 3 days here, regardless of whether or not she had a meaningful choice as to whether or not to give her kids to somebody else, it is incredibly difficult under those circumstances to make an informed decision. And then, as I understand it as well, the family members were coming forward and saying, hey, we want to take custody of her. And ICE was questioning the legitimacy of that relationship. The point here is you put her in an untenable position where, although technically she may have had a choice, she really didn't have a choice and ultimately has to take her kids with her. But again, we go to the larger question, which is the president has promised us a focus on criminals, a focus on gang members. Why did we create this situation in the first place where it was this urgent to take this mother and her kids without giving her a meaningful opportunity to find, some way to hand off her kids to a family member?
And Barrett, that's the question I keep asking. We even asked the Maryland man who was deported to El Salvador's lawyer how he got on this list, how he became a target of these operations. How are they choosing these individuals? Do we know what qualifies someone to qualify for deportation? If, as the administration has said, they're focusing on gang members and criminals to that point, how do moms and their kids get caught up in this sweep?
It's a great question. It really shows how the landscape has shifted even in just the last 100 days. The administration has said very publicly that they wanted to focus on, MS-13 members, gang members, people who were here without cause, who were then, creating violence and committing crimes. That's one thing. Going after people who are here, they may be undocumented, but they have children that are citizens, some of whom have serious illnesses, is a radical shift. And it's so important, and this really demonstrates why due process is so critical in cases like this. Perhaps these mothers wanted to take their children with them. Perhaps that was a well thought out decision, but we don't know. There's no great record of that. We need to make sure those were decisions that were made willingly, that they were made based on complete information, and that everyone who had a stake in this case, whether it's another parent or family members that may have wanted these children to stay here, had the opportunity to be heard. That's why due process is important, and it really seems like that is the part that was missing from this whole process.
Right. Also, if you've been picked up and you have your kids with you and you can't get a hold of anybody else and you're being told you're leaving the country the next day, is that really a choice? What else are you going to do as a mother? You're going to say, okay, let's take the kids with me. John, I want to ask you, can you tell me, how did deportations happen when you were at ICE? Did you get handed a list? Did you get handed things that, categories of people that you wanted to deport, and then you chose the individuals? And is it different this time around than what you're used to or what had happened in the past?
Yeah, typically what ICE does, we establish priorities. And the priorities during the Obama administration, during the Biden administration, were individuals who pose a threat to public safety or had recently crossed the border. But we're at a transition point in the Trump administration, and it all goes back to something that you guys reported on a minute ago, which is these deportation numbers. Deportation numbers, when compared to the Biden administration, are down. Certainly the number of arrests are up, but the actual removals are down. There are complex reasons for that. A lot of it's related to the border. But the biggest reason is these backlogs in the immigration court. So what's clearly happened over the last couple of weeks here is the administration is pivoting away from those criminals and gang members to people who can be quickly deported, who don't need to go back through the immigration court. So when you look at this woman's case, she falls into that category. She had been ordered deported by an immigration court years earlier, but ICE had given her what's called a stay of removal, said because of these kids, we're going to let you stay in this country. We don't want to create this family separation issue. She was checking in, as she was required to do, but the administration wants her as a target because she's already ordered removed. they can put her on the next plane to Honduras very quickly. So as we go forward, I think we're really just beginning to see these kind of cases.
Joining us now is Serene Shabaya, National Immigration Project Executive Director, who is representing one of the families impacted, and Norm Eisen. He is the chair of State Democracy Defenders Fund and former special counsel and special assistant to President Obama. Serene, the White House says these mothers wanted to bring their children with them when they were deported. You say that's not true. What can you tell us about the family you represent?
Thank you, Anna. What I can tell you is that the moms were picked up at what should have been a very routine ICE check-in. They were there with their children, and then they were whisked away and essentially held without communication with the outside world. The first mom was there for 3 full days. There were multiple outreaches made to immigration authorities, providing information about the availability at all times of a legal custodian to take the U.S. citizen child, requesting legal visits, requesting a meaningful conversation between mom and dad so that they could jointly kind of talk about the best interests of the child and what the options were. And all of those requests were denied by immigration authorities who were fully aware of the situation. The second mom was brought in on Thursday morning. And then within 24 hours, the deportation of both parents happened. And with the second mom, one of her kids actually is in late stage cancer treatment. He has stage 4, a very rare form of stage 4 cancer. He was undergoing cancer treatment. The mom specifically objected to her kids being taken with her, in part for that reason, and asked to speak to an attorney. On the outside, the attorney was asking to speak to her, and none of that happened. There was a request for a stay of deportation. I think the picture that's being given by Mr. Homan and others is simply false. That is not what was happening in the situation. Neither mom thought that they had any choice in the situation. They were simply told that their children were going with them, and the attorneys and family members and community supporters on the outside who were trying to reach them were forbidden from doing so. So it was very much a situation of being under duress and being forced to get on a 6 a.m. flight, after being hidden from the world for a period of time.
And so they have now been removed from this country. What are you doing to try to get these children back to the States?
Well, so there is an open court case on behalf of VML, the 2-year-old U.S. citizen child. We are also in regular communication with the attorneys for the other 2 U.S. citizen children. We're exploring all of those options. And I do want to point out, actually, that there's another part of this narrative that is simply untrue, which is neither of those moms came here illegally. They were both coming. One of them came as an asylum seeker, and the other one came as an unaccompanied child. And for reasons that were completely beyond their control, they got in absentia orders of removal, meaning they were issued without their presence. So neither of those moms ever actually had a chance to really present their own legal cases for being in the United States. And so I think we're exploring all of the different legal options that are out there to remedy the lack of due process and the harm that has been visited on both those families.
Well, we really appreciate you bringing us all the context around these cases, helping us understand some of the dynamics in play. Norm, we've also talked about the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, where someone with protected status was deported to that notorious prison in El Salvador. And now we're talking here about U.S. citizens who were removed. What alarm bells does this ring?
Anna, this United States Supreme Court has said 9-0 in these illegal abduction cases, because that's what you have here. The government is abducting people and shipping them out of the country. And 9-0. Even Donald Trump's strongest supporters on the right wing of that Supreme Court has said, hey, all people in the United States are entitled to due process. And what we just heard was a series of shocking violations of due process of the Constitution. It's part of a larger pattern. 100 days of the Trump administration, 100 days of constitutional violations. My organization, the State Democracy Defenders Fund, represents almost 36 conservatives, Anna. Every presidential administration, from Nixon to Trump 1, that has filed briefs in these cases saying this is not constitutional. This is not due process. This is not American, and it's not conservative. Donald Trump represents a total break. The good news is there's been massive court pushback. It's not only 100 days of constitutional and legal violations. It's almost 100 orders declaring them illegal. It's 100 days of failure by Donald Trump. We must continue to push because this is not what America's about.
I mean, Serene, not only have we seen all the heavy lifting that many lawyers like yourself and Norm have gotten involved in here with these different cases and controversies, controversial moves from this Trump administration, but we've also seen a reshaping of the Department of Justice. We've learned in recent days more than 100 lawyers have left the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division after changes that Attorney General Bondi made to civil rights enforcement. How significant are those changes that you may have seen in enforcement in just these first 100 days of this administration?
I think the changes are extremely significant, Anna, because it is truly unprecedented to remove someone, for example, because they told the court the truth. That is actually an oath that as attorneys we swear. And in the attorney, for example, representing the government in the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, my understanding is that he was removed from his position because he told the court the truth about what was happening when asked a question. And, I don't know all the details of that case, but it does seem like there have been many instances of that. And what it means is that it makes it much harder to, in good faith, try to resolve legal issues that are clear.
Law enforcement professionals, police, whatever, officers coming out and saying that what Trump is doing is not only immoral, but likely illegal, and it's a threat to decency and national security. Now, you might think from Trump's perspective, this is going to increase national security because he's removing all the quote-unquote illegals. But let's be really clear about that. Donald, one, in some cases, is deporting citizens. He's deporting some people that maybe he does have the right to remove, but not without due process. And because they didn't get that due process, we already know that some people have been erroneously removed, including somebody who the Supreme Court said 9-0, they did not have the right to do to him what they did, and they need to bring him back. And all this happened, one, because Trump is trying to make an example of human beings, innocent, regular human beings, but also because they're not following the due process. If the due processes were followed, I'm sure some of these people would be deported, but others would still be here. Either their cases would be dropped or they'd be going through them still, but they would not have been sent away illegally. And this is bad because it hurts the United States' reputation. I've been talking about this, like everything Trump's doing, not every national security threat is literally, this country is planning to bomb you. Not every threat is so blatant and so direct. And a lot of the national security threats of Trump are a lack of trust among allies and a lack of trust among the global community. And when you start, like with Trump, willy-nilly tearing up trade deals, you have trade deals with Canada and Mexico, and you're violating them, trade deals with the EU and countries that have done nothing to you, you're throwing 40% tariffs on for no reason. Like, this hurts your reputation, as does your Secretary of Defense leaking things on his private phone, and also being a menace on human rights. America's national security will be imperiled because as powerful as the U.S. is, they depend on allies, but those allies don't trust them anymore.